The informational architect. Who will be the individual who will design the informational cities of tomorrow? And how will they operate? Here, I want to go beyond the notion of the informational city to talk about the informational architect. And let's not forget that the term architecture also refers to computational systems today. In his article, his extraordinary article, iPhone City, Bratton makes a comment, a seemingly throwaway comment, um, which he doesn't really follow through, but which I think deserves to be taken seriously. An experiment. One half of the architects and urbanists in the entire world should, as of now, stop designing new buildings and new developments altogether. Instead, they should invest the historical depth and intellectual nuance of their architectural imaginations into the design and programming of new software that provides for the better use of structures and systems we already have. It is a simple matter of good content management. The other half, the control group, may continue as before. Now, that to my mind is a very interesting proposition. What he's suggesting is that, in a sense, architects use their architectural imagination not to make forms, but to devise new forms of software, so that, in a sense, architects become computer information architects for the future. If I were to look for one example of this, I would probably possibly point to this person on the right hand side here, Shan He. Shan is a graduate of Tsinghua University in Beijing, the leading university of School of Architecture in China. And then a graduate also of MIT, the computation group there. She went from being a student of architecture to work for Uber. And she was working on Uber and tracking as a kind of data visualization to understand their operations. And of course, a company like Uber is needs to find out, how exactly the Uber cars are being used. This is a study of San Francisco where they are tracking the use of Uber cars over time. Likewise, this is a study of London, looking at the use of Uber cars in London. Um, Interestingly, also, Shanho produced an article for a recent issue of Architectural Design where she's looking at the possibility of using these technologies as a kind of a form of design. As she puts it, rapid developments in spatial data mining, analytics, and visualization mean that urbanists now have a collection of open data, advanced tooling, and analytic models at hand to tackle complex urban issues. Granted, geospatial data have always been used in the planning process to facilitate decision making, but it is the explosive volume, variety, and resolution of it, alongside increasing analytic capacity, that has fundamentally changed the horizon of urban studies. Her view is that you have to combine this with your architectural imaginations to be a kind of produce a kind of hybrid thing, whereby, in a sense, you are using these informational systems as an extension, as a prosthesis of the human imagination, and harnessing them in order to use that information to inform your architectural designs. Shanher herself launched a company where she was looking at this data system and produced her own software. Interestingly, that was soon bought up by someone else. It seems to be very clear that this is the future of how we need to think about how architecture itself might operate. And indeed, there are many other systems that are being used, GIS systems, using satellite information to study the city. This is a study of Los Angeles by Biana Bogosian of FIU, where she's harnessing that information to look at how we might engage with city design. And this is the work of some of her students, again, using GIS information to design the city. Increasingly, we were using Esri and other techniques to design our cities. They will be based on information. Of course, there are other forms in which we are using informational systems in the way that we operate in designing buildings. This is operating from the level of the building to the level of the city itself. Everything, in many ways, is being controlled by these kind of systems. Indeed, one can even imagine the possibility of using a kind of agent based system, a kind of modeling behavior, to think how we could lay out the interiors of our buildings. This is a study that gets done by Zaha Hadid Architects, where they're looking at the possibility of modeling those behaviors in order to to uh, to allow for the interior design of a building. There are many advantages to this of modeling this in many ways. You don't have to actually use actual people, and you can use some kind of digital twin to run through this kind of process. And interestingly, also, you can think about how this kind of AI-based system that has been used by life forms, the Dream Estate project, that is quite extraordinary in many ways. If you can imagine this possibility of using these AI-based agents and using them to model potential operations, you could see it as a way of of generating designs themselves. Indeed, when you heard one of the students on the FIU DDES course is speculating about how you can do that in order to imagine how we will be living on other planets. But it's not simply a question of how we can live on other planets. We could use these systems to model and simulate a kind of form of architecture whereby the spaces that have been accommodating these kind of actions and indeed containing these actions are themselves in a kind of dialogue with the agents themselves. This, to my mind, is an obvious way in which we're going to be able to use AI to model the forms of our interior spaces in the future. AI will be there at the center of all aspects of architectural design. And to my mind, these agents, these AI informed agents, give us a glimpse of how we were designing spaces in the future.